Hi everyone, thank you for being here for the first keynote of the Multimedia Day. Now we're having Adam Fay, who does character designer for animation for a living. So let's give him a round of applause.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. As she said, my name is Adam Fay, and I am a character designer for animation. I've worked primarily in TV, so I'm here to talk about kind of the process of what it is to be a character designer in animation. And for anyone who doesn't really know what that means, just if you ever watch a show or anything like that, you'll see the characters on the screen. Someone like me has gone through a lot of drawing and iteration and steps to get those designs from early concepts to what you see on the screen. And yeah. But before I get into that, a little bit about myself. I've been in the industry for about 12 years now. I've worked for studios like Warner Brothers, Netflix, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, amongst a bunch of others. And I've always loved drawing ever since I was a kid. I would watch a ton of cartoons, play a bunch of video games, so much so that my family had to lie to me about our TV not working so that I would just get away from the TV every now and again and not wake them up early in the morning to watch television. But yeah, that was always something I loved to do. And yeah, I still do it to this day. Clearly, I do self-portraits from time to time. It's a fun way to experiment with style and things like that. But growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, these were some of my main things that I was a big fan of that kind of inspired me. There's many others, but I'll kind of boil it down to this. You can see on the right, there was the comic strips I loved as a kid, Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts. I still have stacks of books of them at home. I just love those drawings. Clearly, I still love Peanuts to this day. Samurai Jack was a big one just because of how stylistic and cool and kind of action-focused it was. I'd never seen anything like that before. Pokemon obviously blew up in the 90s, both in games and the animated series. And that not only interested me to the games, but it also introduced me to anime, which would lead me to Miyazaki and Ghibli movies, amongst everything else. And then I also played a ton of games, like I said. I love the action platformers of like Mario and Banjo-Kazooie and like Ratchet and Clank and Psychonauts, as you can see there. But really, I didn't really know anything about character design as a career or just animation industry in general until the game Psychonauts came out. Because the style was so unique, they started promoting it with the art. And I don't know if I saw it online or in a magazine or anything like that, but they shared these designs from Scott Campbell, who was the main character designer of the game. And the fact that like I saw these, and first these drawings are incredible, they're still so cool, but that someone was paid to do this. Like someone made the thing that I love, like the fact that I knew that was a job and I could do that potentially for someone else. Like that was the coolest thing I had ever heard of. And so from then on, I always kind of knew like, I want to be a character designer. And I think I came out when I was around 13 or 14. And so I started like everything I would do artistically would be kind of geared in that direction. And with these drawings, like these were done over 20 years ago on paper with markers and pencils, and they still hold up, and they're still so cool and unique. So it just shows that like good design, regardless of era, will just always kind of hold true and be timeless. From there, I went to college, Cal State Long Beach, where I majored in illustration, and still trying to focus on character design skills or things that I thought would help with character design. It's an awkward photo of me from graduation. And from there, I would start looking for work. I got lucky pretty soon after that at a mobile game studio where I was an intern and later an employee. And then I eventually kind of made my way into television. Here are a bunch of the shows I've worked on. On top of this, I've also done a ton of development work, which is when if a studio is kind of pitching a new idea for a show, but it hasn't been picked up yet to production, they'll just have designers come in and kind of workshop various styles that the show could look like. 90% of the time, that work will never see the light of day because most shows don't get picked up, but it's still very fun and exploratory, and it's a great way to just try different styles and genres and things. I just want to go through a few of these and just kind of point out, like, you'll see that the styles are super different in a lot of these shows. I've kind of bounced between mainly adult comedies and a few kids shows. But no matter what kind of style you're in or what show you work on, regardless if it's adults or kids or if it's something you're even that interested in or not, there's always something you can kind of learn from it, either artistically or otherwise. Like, for example, Legends of Chamberlain Heights, the second image there, That was the first show I worked on as a full-time, full season of character design. Before then, I was just freelance or smaller projects. And so being in that situation, like, this is kind of like a South Park-esque show, so it was like very raunchy kind of comedy. But I really learned what it was like to be in a production, in a studio setting, and to be in the crowd and be in just collaborative in that kind of way. So that was just a very important way to kind of learn. And then after that, I went to a complete 180 to work on the second SpongeBob movie, which, going from a raunchy adult comedy to SpongeBob, it was totally different, both in terms of scale of the production and the style. And also a big thing that was super intimidating about going onto a show that I had grown up watching and that had been around for years is that you don't realize that there's a lot of rules that goes into drawing these characters. So if you're drawing SpongeBob, he has to look exactly the way they want SpongeBob to look. He has specific amount of holes on his head that have to be in the exact right place. His eyelashes go up in a very specific way. His socks go up to a certain level on his shin. And if you don't do that, they will notice, and they will tell you that they noticed. So learning how to train your eyes to fit the style of different shows is just a very useful skill for a designer to have, to really bounce around, especially if you're bouncing around between very different styles like I have. Another big show I worked on the top right there, Final Space, that was very cool just because it was very cinematic and they wanted it to have a lot of drama and action in it, which I hadn't really done a lot of before. And what was really beneficial about that show in particular was in season 2, my art director, Devin Roth, who's amazing, he really wanted his artists to pitch themselves and really push themselves and get themselves out there, because he knows how much working in animation you are adhering to other people's styles and what they want. So any chance a designer gets to kind of put themselves out there, it really feels great and it really boosts your confidence. So I owe a lot to that show in particular. And then just down the line, Animaniacs and Cuphead. Those were super cartoony kids shows. Those were very fun, but also established properties. I watched the original Animaniacs as a kid, and Cuphead I played the video game and was in love with, and obviously it was trying to build off the 1930s kind of art style, which is just kind of animation history, so we all had a lot of reverence for it, and so there was a lot of pressure to kind of make sure we lived up to the history of these properties. But there's a challenge, and there's also a lot of fun to be had in those. And then most recently, I worked on Velma as the lead character designer and assistant art director. This was a huge deal for me because for the first time, I wasn't following someone else's style. I was helping shape the style. And that makes you think a lot more broadly about production and animation as a whole, and how you interact with your designers and how you look at other people's work, because you have to now give notes and make sure other people are following the rules that you have set up. So it really have to train your eyes. Again, I think training your eyes are kind of the most important thing as you become further along in the industry. It's not about how you draw so much as knowing what's right and what's wrong a lot of the times. But now, enough about me. We'll get into the character design process itself. I've kind of broken it down into these different things. There's kind of the different assignments that a character designer might experience on an average day in production. Got expiration, iteration, turnarounds, redress, incidentals, mouth charts, personality, special poses, post-production, and marketing. I'll kind of go through all of these and show examples from shows I've worked on and some other projects, primarily Final Space, Velma, Cuphead, and a few others. So we'll start with expiration and iteration. This is the earliest part in the process. This could either be before an art style is even established, or maybe they have an art style established, but there's a new character that needs to be designed. Usually you'll get a script, sometimes not even that. It could just be a couple sentences describing who or what this character is, and you just kind of have to throw stuff out there. Here's some examples of what that looks like. Usually it's a lot of loose, rough drawings just to kind of get the idea out there to see what sticks. A lot of this is just going to be thrown out, but it's good to know what you want or what you don't want, and then you can figure out what you do want. For example, these robots on the top left, I had very little instruction on this. It was just that he's a robot companion who makes jokes, and he's just along with the character for the ride, but they had no instructions on what kind of style or what kind of robot they wanted it to be, so it's just try a bunch of stuff and see what works. On the top right, this was for a pitch I put together for Blue Falcon based on the old Hanna-Barbera cartoons, but I wanted to go for more of a sci-fi action bend on it. And for this, since it was a pitch, I wanted to go more polished and clean and add some color to it to really sell the idea I had in my head, so that way they knew exactly what I was going for and there wasn't any room to misinterpret. So usually it's just a lot of these kind of loose drawings, a lot of crazy ideas. These were from Final Space, where we had all these crazy big aliens called Titans that were just could be pretty much anything as long as they were incredibly detailed and hard to draw. Here's another example from a specific project. This was from a Nickelodeon show called Middlemost Post, which came out a year or two ago. This was early in development. They didn't end up using these styles, so it just shows like, even though I did all this work for them, like this was not the look they ended up going for, but this did help inform where they wanted to go. So on the top, in the realm of this world, it was kind of broken up into different neighborhoods, broken up by elements and colors. So it was like blue, red, green, and yellow, I believe. And so they just wanted to see some ideas for what the blue and red people would look like, obviously very water and fire-based creatures. So it was just kind of any idea that I had, they were open to seeing. And then the bottom two images were for one of the main characters, this lumberjack guy, where they gave me some initial sketches that the creator had done. So I kind of used a little bit of the shapes, like the big torso and the skinny legs. But really, like you can see that there's a bunch of different shapes that I'm trying here. And even though they all kind of resemble the same kind of character, they all feel a little bit different. So it's really just about experimenting and trying different things until you find what works. And now I want to kind of go through Velma, my time on that, because I had the unique time of I came on very early in development, and then I was able to just roll straight into production through the whole 2 seasons. So usually there's a gap between development and production, or sometimes you do development and it never goes into production at all. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of see what my very first sketches looked like and how we got to the final approved designs. So the first image was my first pass. They just said like, hey, we're trying out different artists. We like these examples from your website. Can you do some characters in that style? I was like, sure. So they liked them, but they're like, okay, we want to see some iterations on Fred, because he was reading a little too like muscle bro, kind of a jock. They wanted him to be more like Justin Bieber kind of energy. So we put that kind of stuff over here. And then on here, we were a little looser with Daphne and Norville because they kind of like the general vibe, but they just wanted kind of an attitude adjustment and more hair options for Daphne. So you just see, it's just a lot of rough things. It might be hard to tell on the screen, but these different poses for Norville, it's just a little subtle expression change in the eyebrows or the smile, things like that, just to kind of sell who this character is in one pose. And I ultimately ended up with these designs. This was my first approved pass, which I still really like how they look. They really wanted to push the expressions and all of that to make it like not kind of static looking, to be more pushed. They used like Avatar: The Last Airbender as a reference, which I was like, perfect, I love that show. But even from here, once these were approved, they still wanted to experiment more. So on the top, I just started with Norville, just trying a few different versions, but making it a little more cartoony, maybe a little more simple. Or for Velma on the top right there, they just wanted to see her maybe in a more traditional classic outfit, like from the original Scooby-Doo. But then meanwhile, while I was doing all this other designer, Cole Ott, another great designer, he did this pass on the designs. And there was something they were really liking about the proportions and how they all stood next to each other as a group. So like, we like the energy and the structure of what you're doing, but we want to see if you can kind of apply that to the style that Cole was doing. So first thing, since I was kind of building off someone else's style, I just literally redrew the characters based on, and added a couple notes about like Velma's body type and Norville's outfit, but just redrew it in my own hand. So even though it's very similar, there's a lot of subtle differences in just how the volumes wrap around, like on the cuffs, the proportions of the legs and the hair, and just really subtle things that just make the characters feel more like how I would draw them, so that I'm not feeling like I'm just copying what Cole was doing. And from here, this is where like a lot of the real iteration stuff started happening. So it was like, cool, they're getting closer now, but let's just try a bunch of different stuff with the outfit and the hair and smile, and just try to see if we can get closer and closer and closer. And ultimately, we ended up, after all these different outfits and stuff, especially on Velma, you see like tried a bunch of different things that are all very subtle and different, but in a lot of ways, oftentimes it's not about trying big different swings, it's about subtle changes to what's already there. And eventually we ended up here. These are the final approved designs that are now in the show. so you can kind of see like how the process from beginning to end was. Velma changed the most because they ended up really wanting to scale back, pushing her away from the original design. They liked a lot of what Daphne already had, so we kept a lot of that the same. And then, yeah, you can just see like my first pass plus Cole's pass equals this pass. All right, so next part in the process are turnarounds. Now that you've figured out what the design looks like, it's time to just kind of flesh them out and kind of build them ready to be used in production. So a turnaround is literally just turning around the character. It can be called other things like 360s or stuff like that, but I've always just called them turnarounds. Usually you'll see them in kind of 8-point turns, so 8 different positions. Some shows do more, like I know Rick and Morty does 16-point turns, which is just they add a step in between every one that I've done here. Some do fewer, like 2 to 5. It really depends on the show and the style. 8 is usually good because you get both the left and the right side. So if you have any kind of asymmetrical element, it's good to just do that. So even though the Velma designs are pretty symmetrical in terms of their outfits and things like that, there is enough going on that's asymmetrical where it's worth fleshing out. Like the hair is different from one side to the other. The folds of the sleeves are different on one side versus the other. It just gives it a little bit more uniqueness to the turn as opposed to just a static image that's the same all the way around. And then for this kind of ghoulish monster on the bottom, she's very complicated, so I'm very glad we didn't have to do a full turn on her. But because her scenes were very curated and we did a lot of extra steps in the animation process, we didn't have to do a full turn, so it was more just about making sure all the details of her were there and that we could give lighting information on her since every scene she's in had unique lighting. And here are just some other examples of turnarounds from different shows. It just kind of shows that like the same process can be used in any style, be it like Cuphead with a anthropomorphic telephone, or Green Lantern and Harley Quinn, or this like weird robot thing from Final Space. It's all the same techniques that you're using, regardless of style. One thing that I thought was unique was this turnaround I did for Steven Universe. I didn't end up working on that show. I did a test for it, but didn't get the job. But one thing I really liked about their turns is that they didn't want the static poses. They wanted the turns, every angle, to have some kind of emotion or energy to it, which most shows don't do that, at least in Hollywood, but for them they did, and I thought that was really unique and fun. The next step is redress. This will happen throughout the season, like your character needs a different outfit or something like that. You can only do that once the base model is established. You see that a lot in comedies. So for example, on the top, here's a bunch of examples of Daphne from season 1 that we had different outfit ideas for various situations. Sometimes it's a complete outfit change, like the first one. Sometimes it's just adding a jacket and a hat to an existing outfit. Or if it's like the one at the very end where she got a little dirty and her hair's messed up, it's basically anything that changes the default outfit would be categorized as a redress in a new model. So you would have to make it a separate design, even if it's the same outfit that it's based on. And then for Final Space, we have these like full Iron Man suits, which completely cover the characters. And they're the same design on both characters, but because their proportions are so different, we had to really make sure that they worked in all angles. Cuphead, there was just some fun pirate outfit redresses and things, and just some Final Space designs as well for variety. Next are incidentals. Character designers will spend a lot of time doing incidentals on a show. Those are just the background characters that fill out the scene so that when your main characters are walking around, they're not just inhabiting an empty room or things like that. And these can really vary depending on the situation or what show you're working on. Like for example, on the top here, this is from Final Space where they went to a Renaissance-themed planet inhabited by squid people. Or on the bottom in Harley Quinn, they went to a college campus, so these are just a bunch of college kids. Or close enough, there's some like Marie Antoinette-esque like French outfits and stuff. So oftentimes it's just like we just need regular looking people in the background at like a concert or a restaurant or something, but sometimes you really get to have fun with that depending on the setting. And just to show how extensive that can get, this is the packet that we did for Velma Season 1. And our supervising director was great. She had this whole system for how we wanted to organize and label all the incidentals so that they're categorized by different like outfits and types and stuff. So we have like high school students and casual dress and seniors. And I mean, it just keeps going. We have miscellaneous, police and guards, kind of criminal, sketchy people, professional-looking people, medical professionals, and kids. And so this was just for season 1. And then for season 2, I think we doubled the amount of incidentals that we had just based on the specific situations. So it just shows like, one, having it all organized and stuff like this is super helpful because it just makes storyboarding and animation that much easier. And also, it just shows how much goes into just the background of the show that you're working on. There we go. Next in the process are mouth charts. These are often character designers' least favorite thing to do because they're it's very highly scrutinized, the kind of work. It's literally the mouth shapes that the characters make, how they talk. So they're broken up into different mouth sounds like oohs and ahs and ulls and things like that. And so that can really vary depending on the show. For example, on the top, this is from Clone High, where almost every character has a different shaped head and mouth. So every character needed a different mouth chart. And oftentimes you'll do these in both happy and sad and neutral, just to see like, especially with the guy on the left where his jaw completely is detached from the rest of his head. So that requires a lot more figuring out. This is kind of hard to see, but this was from the Gremlins show that came out last year, and that was a CG show versus a 2D one. And so sometimes they'll have character designers draw over the models to kind of push the models and the rigs just to make sure that the emotions are hitting and it's not feeling too restricted by what already exists on the 3D model. And then there's just an example from Cuphead. A lot of those mouths were kind of the similar kind of bean shape, but it's kind of figuring out where on the head it works since the characters' faces all looked very different. And then on bottom, this is that same kind of ghoulish monster from Velma, who only talked on occasion, but because her design was so detailed, we had to give like specific instructions on that. Cool. And again, to show how extensive it can get, these were all the mouth charts I did just for Fred for season 1. So again, we got front-facing, three-quarter, and profile, since the mouth will look different from each angle. And we have happy, neutral, and sad expressions while talking. I did this for all the main characters, so it was just a ton of work, but it can often be very useful, especially early on in the days of the show, because you can use this for reference for other characters, not just the main characters, especially when you have like a lot of humans and it's not too pushed of proportions. But again, this took forever, but it ended up being incredibly useful. Next, so you finished all the technical work for the design. You know how they look from all angles, you know how they talk, how they're dressed. Now it's time to figure out how they act and their personality. This is my favorite part of it, because it's where like the hard part, or the hardest part to me, is really just kind of nailing what the core design is. Now you just get to play around with it. So this is used for reference for the storyboard artists and the animators to kind of know like how the characters are supposed to act in any given situation. And you can see like each character, they kind of have similar expressions on the sheet, like happy, sad, surprised, or scared, but each one feels a little bit different. So even though they are the same expressions, it's about how Daphne will smile differently than how Norville will smile, or how Fred will scream differently than how Velma will scream. So each character needs to kind of feel unique in how they react and respond and things like that to make them really feel alive. Here's some other examples from work. The top and right are just from personal projects. I pitched a Batgirl project a while back just to show just the variety and the fun that you can have with it. It's really just like the more fun that is in the poses, the more that the animators and the storyboard artists can use and put into their part of it. So it really is important to really nail this part early on. And another way that this is beneficial for Final Space, we did not just expressions, but we also included head different like tilts, angles, up and down, left and right kind of thing. So that's a great reference for the animators in particular, so that they know how this character should look if they're looking down and you're just seeing this part of the head or something like that. Because oftentimes you only, like on the turnarounds, they're just looking straight ahead. Oh, one thing that was fun about putting this presentation together is that I was able to go through all my old files, and I found this guy I did a few years ago. I was working on, just made this guy for fun while I was working on Animaniacs, so you can kind of see where my mind was at the time, very Animaniacs kind of vibe. But there was no story connected to this guy at all, no world. I just started drawing this guy, and I liked how he looked, so I just kept drawing him. So you can really kind of feel the personality of this guy, even though there's no indication of the story or the world that he belongs to. So it just shows like a character can exist kind of in a bubble, even if that's not what he's intended for. Yeah. Next part is special poses. So you've got the technical part done. You've got the personality done. Now it's time to put it into practice in the actual episode of your show. This usually happens after storyboarding has been done. And this is when you will take specific storyboard panels that maybe require a bit more information than has been provided before. It could be a unique angle, like if you're looking straight down on a character, how it looks foreshortened, or straight up, or just if there's a specific pose or expression that you want to push in a specific way that needs just a little more attention and a little more polish. There's different types of special poses, so I'll go through different examples of those. That was what I would just call general poses, like I was talking about, just you take the storyboard panel and you just make a drawing that is on model to the design but fits the energy of the storyboard panel that you were referencing. So these are just a bunch of different ones from Final Space. You see like Gary flying in jetpacks with a jetpack in very specific foreshortened angles. So we wanted to make sure the geometry kind of felt right for him there, or we just have some goofy expressions. Animaniacs is nothing but goofy expressions, so we used a ton of special poses for that show. And for Velma, this was a scene where they were having a flute battle where they were playing terribly. So it was just super funny just to draw playing the flute terribly. I don't know, that was just very fun. The next type of poses I call lighting and action poses. This is when you have like very unique situations that you really want to punch up the emotion of whatever you're trying to achieve. This usually involves lighting and color that will eventually be added just because there's so much specificity involved. I got to do a lot of these on Velma, and these were super fun. But you can see like each one of these is trying to kind of have a different emotion attached to it. So like the top one, or the top left one here, is kind of a hero entrance. They're like pushing a door open, and it's very big and epic, and you see a bunch of characters there, so we have to make sure that they all kind of fit in the scene together. The top right was supposed to be like creepy but funny, so I just had a lot of fun with that one. You see the storyboard panel up there is very simple by comparison, so they let me kind of get away with a lot on that, and I was very thankful. This one here is it's very romantic and idealistic kind of lighting and mood, so really kind of push the lighting there. And then on the bottom right is very like dramatic and scary with these monsters and the special kind of purple and green lighting that we used for those sequences. So you see it all kind of uses the same techniques, but it's done in different ways to achieve different emotions. Next type are sequence poses. We use a ton of these on Cuphead. These are basically like if a character is doing a specific action, but it has multiple poses or stages to that action that they want to kind of figure out ahead of time, and so the animators just have to animate the specific poses and not have to figure it all out on their own. So you see like Cuphead on the first one here, they're walking through a graveyard, and they're very scared, but they're trying to act like they're not scared, so they're walking really fast and being really intense. On the right, it's them tumbling down a hill, so it's the various stages of them bumping along down the way. And then on the bottom here is Mugman being possessed by the ghost of Miss Chalice, and it's his body kind of freaking out from being possessed in different angles. So yeah, these can often take a lot of time, but they'll be on screen for 5 seconds max, but it really adds a lot to that scene if you just have all these elements there. You really notice it when it's there. And sequence poses are also something that you'll get kind of the most variety, because a sequence can kind of be anything. So this top one was from Final Space, where there's this kind of hallucinatory, psychedelic sequence that was really fun and weird to do. So like the storyboards were very loose, so it's kind of figuring out how do we get from this magic time baby to this swirl at the end. And so all these in-between stages had to be figured out, and that was just super complicated, but very fun and rewarding to figure out. On the bottom here from Clone High, it was like a TikTok video of an influencer dropping a hot lasagna on her face for the camera. So just very weird and funny. And then just like could be just as simple as just someone doing a dance move, just turning around. Again, just a couple seconds on screen for all those drawings. And then sometimes you can get all of it in one. It's a general action lighting sequence poses. So these are very fun and very rewarding. And oftentimes, this is exactly what you'll see on screen, and that's very fun to do. Like the first one is one of my favorite things I did on Velma, just this gradual melting of her face. And this was, I think, in the second episode. So once I did this and it got approved, I was like, okay, so this is what we're allowed to do. So I kind of use this as kind of a base for everything I did moving forward. In the middle, this is from Final Space, is a Titan trying to get out of a portal, so he's kind of stuck and he's freaking out about it. And then on the bottom, this is a kind of something you'll see a lot in animation and sequence poses, are these kind of explosions or kind of characters that kind of turn into an effect of some kind. So just see like the gradual exploding of a character. It would be a lot for the animation studio to figure out on their own, both in terms of drawing, but color and lighting and everything like that. So it's very useful and very helpful, but also very cool. Next up are crowd shots and crowd poses. This is when you just have a bunch of characters on screen. Oftentimes, if you can avoid it, these can take a lot of time and can be very difficult depending on the complexity of the crowd shot, like that skeleton one, for example. Usually, if you can, you'll just kind of use the existing incidentals that I showed earlier to populate a scene. But if you need the crowd to be behaving in a certain way, or if it's just too big and dense to just populate a bunch of things individually, you got to know how to like stylize and simplify things in order to make it fit on screen and not look too busy. Sometimes you'll have just like a lot of times it's cheering crowds. That's a big one that you'll use for things. And oftentimes you'll have to do two different poses where they're like, yeah, and then yeah, so that the animators don't have to figure out what the A and B poses are. Sometimes it's just static people standing in line. Or sometimes it's not even like a crowd, it's just a group of existing characters like an Animaniacs, but their proportions are so wildly different that you want to figure out what they all feel like together and make sure it doesn't feel awkward. And here's some other examples of crowd shots. Sometimes you'll design them directly on the background, like this Cuphead one here. It's a little faded out, but it's there. So you see it's like a line leading up to the house kind of a thing. Or on the top right, all these little devil guys at a party. Something you'll see a lot, like in the back, what we use to kind of cheat the illusion of a lot of people or a big crowd is just kind of a generic shape that insinuates a crowd. You see that a lot in 2D in particular. It saves you a lot of time and also makes sure the scene doesn't look too complicated or busy. Next we have post-production. So sometimes if you're on during post-production, sometimes the designers will wrap before. But if the animation comes back in and say a character isn't looking quite right, they'll have the character designers kind of come in and draw over the frames of the animation itself. These are some frames that I worked on in Animaniacs, just to make sure like the face proportions are reading right, the attitude is reading right, or sometimes it's just not hitting the style the way you want it to. So it's about going in and just like tweaking things subtly while not having to redraw the entire thing, because that can be very expensive and time consuming as well. So it's also learning about picking your battles, about what needs fixing the most and prioritizing that. Here's some other examples. Sometimes there's nothing necessarily wrong with the drawing that came back from animation, but you just want to plus up what was there. Like in the top left here, we wanted more drama and intensity in the scene, so we pushed Fred's expression and added these details and shadows to the hand and gun that he's holding just to make sure that it's reading as dramatic as we want it to. Or sometimes you have to change the kind of the framing of the shot itself. So the way that it came back for this one here, Velma was kind of cut off at the ankles and it was reading a little awkward. So we're like, we want to zoom out a little bit and we want to fix her proportions a bit so she fits naturally on screen and it's not too awkward. The last step of the process I'll talk about is marketing. So that's like the show's done and now it's time to promote it via a poster or ads or anything you might see online, or a press release or something like that. Here's a couple examples I did. The top row were all options I gave for Velma for season 1. The one on the right was the one that we ended up using, so that was very cool. It was the first time that a drawing I did ended up on like billboards around town, so that was very cool to see. The others we didn't really use. I think for the second to the right one, they used the character pose in like Instagram ads and stuff like that, but not as the main image. And then on the bottom was when I was working on Final Space, so you can see the sketch, the second to the right, and then the final, they used my concept, and then I kind of worked with the art director to finish up the characters, and he did the final color on that one. So yeah, it's very satisfying to get to this part of the process if you're able to, just because you've spent so long making a show, and you've put all this time and effort in figuring out who these characters are, and now you get to make one image that kind of sums up exactly how you want to sell the show to audiences. So that is just a very cool and satisfying part to be a part of. But yeah, so that is basically the ins and outs of the day-to-day of a character designer. And now I will get to the Q&A portion. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for your amazing keynote.
Thank
Does
you.
anyone have any questions? Just raise your hand, and I'll go with the microphone.
Hello.
Hi.
So in Eastern animation, we often see more human-like forms and shapes and silhouettes, but in Western animation, we see much more exaggerated, not very human-like shapes. And why do you think that's the case? What's the mentality here versus?
I think it could be a couple reasons. One could be just like the history of where the animation came from. Like in anime, for example, even though they had more cartoony and simplified shapes early on in anime's history, they kind of evolved to really prefer that kind of more anatomical and more realistic looking designs. Whereas in Western animation, the biggest thing that really blew up was Disney. And we've kind of shaped a lot from that. And then in TV, especially in adult, Simpsons was the biggest one to kind of base things on from there. And that was very simplified as well. So a lot of it is kind of basing on what was successful before, but also in terms of Western animation versus anime, Western animation can be much more expensive because anime artists historically don't get paid very well. So it's about what is cost effective to animate. So the more simple your design is, the easier it is to animate and the cheaper it is to do. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question.
Hey, I wanted to ask how hard can it be to balance your own personal style of drawing a character with the guidelines that you have for a specific design for a show?
Mm-hmm. That can be a real challenge, honestly, especially early on, because you want to get your voice in there as much as you can, but sometimes you're just on a show that is nothing like how you draw. So you kind of just, it's the job. Like you just have to kind of turn yourself off and just be like part of the machine and like, this is what they need me to do, so this is what I'm gonna do. And oftentimes I find artists find a lot of relief in just personal projects or just drawing for fun. I do a lot of fan art on my Instagram, so that is a way that I get to experiment a lot with style if I'm not doing something that is as fulfilling as I would like it to be. So that's why I had like all those Batgirl drawings. I just like Batgirl, so it was just fun to do for myself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, another question?
We had one over here.
Hi, Adam. I wanted to ask you, how would you use AI to empower your job as a character designer?
That is a good question. Honestly, as of right now, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing I love is the exploration aspect of it and kind of figuring it out on my own. Whereas I'm sure animation can be, or AI can be used in animation in an effective way that isn't feeling like it's stepping on the artist's toes. But it's kind of hard to find. We're still pretty early in kind of seeing how that's going to happen. But for now, like the joy of it is just what is a human artist able to bring to this experience? And you see like with the variety of styles, like, yeah, it's something that, I don't know, it's kind of hard to balance. So I'm not sure at the moment. You know?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, there was a question over here.
So you mentioned quite a few times that they get approved by someone.
Yes.
So who are the people behind the jury?
The approval?
Let's say? Are they also with an animation background, or?
Yeah, it's always someone part of the show, usually someone part of the show. So there's kind of an approval process. So if you're just like a rank and file designer, then it would go to a lead character designer who is in charge of like making sure everything fits the style. And then after that, it can go to an art director who's in charge of the art overall on the show across all departments. And then there's the showrunners and the producers who will kind of view things together. Sometimes they're not artists, so they might see, so there could be a design that all of the art people have approved, but then the not art people will see it and be like, oh, but this isn't exactly what we wanted, kind of thing. So then it has to go back to one kind of thing. And then once everyone approves it on the show, then it has to eventually go to the executives in the studio. Oftentimes they won't nitpick specific designs, but that does happen on occasion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Unfortunately, we do not have any more time to continue the Q&A here, but it will continue in the showcase area on the left. A big round of applause for Adam again.
Thank you.
And now we're gonna pick a winner for this session, which is this. Congratulations, Mari.